Movies and horror movies in particular have a way of leaving impressions on us that are often unforgettable, especially when you start watching horror at a young age like I did. Jason, Michael, Freddy, and Chucky weren't the names of my closest friends, but at one point in my early life, they may as well have been. I was obsessed with horror movies after being introduced to them at the tender age of 5 by my awesome older cousins. Now in my 40s, I'm discovering some hidden gems of the slasher genre that I've overlooked through the years. Before May 12th of this year, I had never seen The Burning, although I was aware of the film's premise and connection to the real-life killer Cropsey, aka the Boogeyman of New York. His real name was Andre Rand, and he was responsible for the deaths of multiple children in Staten Island, New York. But that's not why we're here today. And no, we're not talking about season 9 episode of Seinfeld that carried the same title.
Experiencing any discomfort?
Just a little burning during urination.
The Burning gets unfairly called a Friday the 13th ripoff, which is ironic considering the roots of Friday the 13th in relation to Halloween, but I digress. The Burning, released in theaters on May 8th, 1981, against a budget of $1.5 million US, would only bring in $707,000 in the US and Canada, at the time making it an absolute flop. Production was handled by Miramax Films. Yes, infamously, this is the film that launched the careers of Harvey and Bob Weinstein, with Harvey producing and Bob penning the screenplay with Peter Lawrence. The special effects were handled by legendary master of gore, Mr. Tom Savini, who I had the pleasure of meeting a few years ago at Horror Hound in Cincinnati. Savini famously passed on heading up effects on Friday the 13th Part 2 in favor of The Burning, helping make this underrated gem into the cult classic we're discussing today. Released in a jam-packed slate of horror movies in 1981 that included some of the following titles: Friday the 13th Part 2, Madman, Scanners, Evil Dead, My Bloody Valentine, Halloween 2, The Howling, Omen 3, The Final Conflict, The Funhouse, and Road Games, that room full of killers would create difficulty for any new villain on the block to stand out, especially with Michael Myers returning for a second outing and Jason Voorhees making his on-screen debut proper in Friday the 13th Part 2 after a jump scare-inducing cameo at the end of the first film that was created by Tom Savini. Cropsey had his work cut out for him, so now it's our job to see how he handled the task. But first, for the uninitiated, a brief overview of our plot. At summer camp, some teenagers pull a prank on the Camp Blackfoot caretaker, Cropsey. But the joke goes terribly wrong, and the teens leave Cropsey for dead after setting him on fire. But no one keeps Cropsey down. A few years later, the burned and disfigured caretaker returns to camp, equipped with his trusty shears, ready to unleash his particular brand of vengeance on a whole new group of teens. The murderous Cropsey stalks the campers in the woods, one by one. It has to be said that this film has the cloud of the Weinsteins hanging over it, and through the hormone-driven action of the film's male characters, that much is perfectly clear. Starting with the softball game played by the girls at Camp Stonewater, where their attire is less than functional for softball, to Alfred, played by Brian Backer, peeping on Sally in the shower, and the way that entire scene was shot and framed, and it being brushed aside swiftly with no punishment, to Eddie verbally berating Karen during their skinny dip session when she considers going all the way with him, and she still died. As I stated earlier, the Weinstein cloud hung low when it came to the sex and innuendos in the movie, but not so much that it's unenjoyable. Knowing what we know now, it just helps understand why the creative choices were made in the manner in which they unfolded in this movie. But we're not here to discuss the motives of the filmmakers and to judge the ethics that went into the creative process. No, my friends. Today we're discussing the most iconic scene in this movie, at least in this narrator's humble opinion. So let's dive into the river, then head upstream in our canoes to take a better look at the Raft massacre. The setup for this iconic sequence starts when Todd and Michelle take the campers on a canoe trip on Devil's Creek, which conjures ominous imagery based on the name alone, making it the perfect setting for the slaughter. There's a great campfire scene where Todd tells them the legend of Cropsey, which absolutely mirrored that of the exposition scene in Friday the 13th Part 2, but it's arguably done better in The Burning. Karen and Eddie sneak off for a skinny dip and some hanky-panky, but she has second thoughts, angering Eddie, who leaves after having his advances spurned. Karen looking for her clothes, which had been strewn throughout the woods, and she finds her missing items piece by piece. She's then killed by Cropsy as he slits her throat. The following morning, Michelle awakens to all the canoes missing, along with Karen, so they vehemently question Eddie regarding Karen's whereabouts. With no canoes and no other means of conveyance, our campers are forced to improvise, so they build the makeshift raft. This very raft that Eddie, Fish, Woodstock, Diane, and Barbara would float on Devil's Creek all the way until they meet their untimely demise at the hands or shears of Cropsy. So let's take a look at the scene and the genius work of special effects and gore master Tom Savini. Our intrepid group of campers and their Huck Finn-esque raft paddle until they spot one of their seemingly abandoned canoes and immediately paddle towards it and are ambushed and slaughtered by Cropsy, who is lying in wait for them with his shears. From start to finish, the scene lasts 37 seconds, but its impact on the movie overall can't be measured in frames per second due to its overall violent nature, which really encapsulates just how bloody this movie is. This is one of those scenes that sticks with you. Even if you forget the details of the movie or a character's name, this scene will stay with you. As the five brave souls paddle their raft down Devil's Creek and one of their lost canoes comes into view, a sense of relief seemingly washes over them, only to be met with rather ominous music as they make their final approach. Eddie instructs Woodstock to prepare to grab the canoe. The score crescendos, and Cropsy, albeit with impeccable balance that's in a canoe in the water, proceeds to massacre these hapless teens, starting with shears to the chest of Fish, and the blood splatter effects in this were top-notch. Barbara is next, getting stabbed in the back and then falling into the water. Diane screams whilst covered in blood. Woodstock gets his fingers chopped off in a gruesome scene highlighted by the masterful creations of Mr. Savini. Eddie gets knocked to his back, and which apparently caused his neck to elongate as if he were a giraffe, just so he can have the aforementioned neck get run through with Cropsy's shears. Diane is the last to die as she lay helpless on her back, again screaming in vain as our antagonist finishes her off with a slash to the head. This scene ends with a shot of her arm hanging off the raft with a trickle of blood running down it, and the scene transitions to a red screen. If it's your first time viewing this and you're not left saying, "What the fuck just happened?" then you may want to check your pulse, because you just witnessed a piece of slasher history that definitely stands the test of time in terms of practical effects created by a Rhodes Scholar on the subject. What makes this scene hit so much harder was the lightheartedness that went into building the raft and the departure of the ill-fated crew that was filled with optimism and hope for rescue, only to meet their doom at the hands, again, shears of the maniacal killer named Cropsy. If you're wondering what happens to the raft, it inexplicably floats right back to the area where they departed, leaving the stranded survivors on shore looking more confused and partially relieved until Counselor Michelle swims out to investigate and makes a grisly discovery that everyone aboard is dead and help isn't on the way, only increasing the overarching sense of dread that the audience shares with our campers. That's a closer look at just one of the many iconic scenes from an underrated gem of an early 80s slasher, The Burning. If you're interested in more videos like this, if you're a fan of 80s and 90s horror, slashers, and you want to see me do another breakdown in this manner, let me know in the comments below. Do you like The Burning? Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Subscribe if you haven't. Click the bell for notifications. Follow us on X at Etep WWH420. Channel memberships available at $2.99 and $4.99. Become a Brainbuster on Patreon for $2 a month, as we have a deep catalog of commentaries available, and we're only adding more. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, a pleasant tomorrow, and remember, it's always better to burn out
than to fade away.